Hello, everybody,
Okay.
and welcome back to our third session of the day. We have with us for this session, Fred, it's Scholpp, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Correct.
Fred
Correct.
Scholpp, armor of Jamestown. So for anyone who's not from the United States, and Jamestown was the first lasting English colony in the United States. It happened around the same time of a time period I portray, which is Popham. I portray the Popham colony as part of one of my lecture series, the Popham Soldier. And that happened. Jamestown and the Popham colony were of the same company, but Jamestown lasted somehow. Even after all the stuff they went through, they lasted, while Popham did not. So good job, Jamestown. So I'm going to turn it over.
We didn't have to deal with Maine winters, so
That's true. Well, I mean, but just a little tangent here, though. Popham only had one recorded death, and that was of George Popham, the governor of it. And then basically, everybody, they ran out of money, and Raleigh was made a lord, and he wanted to go back home and live in a castle, and everything just fell apart. Well, Jamestown, I mean, went through a lot of stuff, but they stuck around. So, but we're not here to talk about the actual history, that part of the history. We're here to talk about the armor. So I'm going to turn it over to Fred. Fred, thank you so much for being with us today.
thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
All right. Okay. Well, I first wanted to welcome all of you to my presentation on arming the Jamestown soldier. And this is fairly narrow focusing on the Jamestown colonists and the rather unique military situation that evolved. But before I get into that, let me tell you a little bit about who I am and where I'm from. And so, all right, looks like I'm using that. Okay, here we go. Well, I started working for the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation in 1983. Back then, our museum was called the Jamestown Festival Park. These days, we operate two museums, one at Yorktown and one at Jamestown, the American Revolutionary Museum at Yorktown and Jamestown Settlement. We have 5 outdoor living history exhibits, and we also have 2 galleries, and we have an outreach program as well, an educational outreach program. And so we have 3 recreated 17th century ships. We have a 18th century farm site, a Continental Army encampment, a recreated Powhatan Paspahegh exhibit, and then the James Fort. And the James Fort, it was a recreation of the James Fort, was where I work. And so I was going to tell you a little bit about that. We have a living history program, and all of us get a chance to do some really fun stuff with our visitors. We have a very strong cooking program, and not only do we have the cooking side, but we also do some serious research to find out what 17th century food tastes like. Not a hardship. And we also do a fair number of historic trades, leatherworking, carpentry. We have a blacksmith, we have a cutler, and we have I'm an armorer. I also, pardon me for a second, and we have a military program. And I'm going to go back one. How do I do that? Can you do that? Okay. And visitors, we're very big into the things that I'm doing. And as you can see, I'm having a chat. I'm wearing my armor, and we're having a discussion with this young man who's wearing some armor, which I made to, well, give the visitors a chance to try it on. And of course, who doesn't want a chance to feel a good reproduction of the period sword? So, and so a lot of fun with hands-on opportunities. And the part that I'm most involved with is the military program. For instance, you can see myself and two colleagues here standing at our annual event, which is a great deal of fun. It's an event called Military Through the Ages. I think we've been doing that since 1984. And if you ever find yourself in the Williamsburg area, and the third weekend of March, you should come visit Military Through the Ages. We have a very good time.
I was gonna say that's coming right up this year, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Let's see. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our history of our military program. When I got to Jamestown in 1983, our military program was very basic. And we did a pageant or a ceremony, a changing of the guard. We didn't get a chance to do much really interesting. And I think to the museum's embarrassment at the time, we didn't have any good source for good period style armor. We were using theatrical armor, which was gas made out of plastic. And so in 1983, they decided we need to start a military program. And so I've been fortunate. I've got a chance to work with a lot of wonderful people. And as we've built up our military program in our recreated James Fort. Well, the heart of our military program is weapons demonstrations. And so here you can see we shoot a lot of matchlock muskets. It is a demonstration we do many times a day. And quite frankly, it gives us a lot of experience with this rather fascinating old weapon. And of late, I've been really delighted because our archery program in our recreated Paspahegh Town exhibit has really grown in the past couple of years. So as you can imagine how delightful it is to be doing a demonstration of the matchlock musket while a person who is a competent archer is standing there telling, and sometimes in a nice academic argument as we decide really which weapon's better, what do you like, what do I like? And we have an awful lot of fun with our weapons demonstrations, and well, we're always learning things with them as well. We also do some unit demonstrations, and as you can imagine, most museums don't have a generous staff that would allow you to field a 50-man company of staff. What we do have is we'll occasionally get our staff together and do a small-scale military demonstration. But one of the things we do in special events is we like to drag our visitors into ranks. And of course, 3 men doing a pike drill is, well, I mean, it can be good, but it's not as awesome as having a lot of pikes and showing how a pike formation really works. And so one of our favorite activities, this one was from a couple of years ago, where we, a demonstration we call Defending the Colony. And so here we're running through a combination of pike and shot tactics with the idea that, hey, Jamestown was always worried about a possibility of a Spanish attack. Well, if the Spanish come, you're going to have to fight European-style warfare. We also have a wonderful core of volunteers who help us out, folks from all aspects. We have some of the modern martial artists. We have folks who are into matchlock shooting. We've got a lot of reenactors. We've just got a really solid core of folks that come out. And this was, of all time, my favorite demonstration. In the year of 2007, we had a Jamestown's anniversary, our 400th anniversary, and where, well, we had kind of the whole world focused on us. In fact, we even had the Queen of England come to visit us, and boy, that was pretty exciting. But this was on the anniversary weekend, we were able to field 63 volunteers for our military demonstrations, which we were doing about 3 a day. And so Maybe some of you who are here might recognize either some familiar faces or maybe you're in there too. I hope you are. And I would like to point out, we do have an active volunteer program. And if anyone wants to come on out and learn a bit more about the 17th century by doing it, oh, this is the place. And so I'm going to move along because I want to talk a little bit about our armoring program. We've always tried to tell the story of Jamestown, especially Jamestown between 1610 and 1614, which is the focus of our recreated James Fort. Trying to tell that story without the armor would be really difficult. And so in 1983, had a fair challenge to start getting us some metal armor. And well, I was the most common helmet found in the archaeological evidence for Jamestown was a helmet we probably almost all of us know, the helmet called the Cabesset helmet. And fortunately, right about 1600, armorers started making these helmets in two pieces. And boy, does it simplify the process. But of late, looking at all of the two-piece helmets and realizing that about half of the helmets that the colonists left behind for archaeologists to find are made out of a single piece in the more 16th century style. And so recently we've been doing some experimental archaeology, trying to figure out how you make a helmet out of a single piece. And we've been learning a lot about this, mostly by getting some metal hot and hitting it. But I particularly wanted to put a shout out to Mr. Wade Allen, who has shared some wonderful theories and talked about some of the experience he and his friends have had trying to do basically the same thing. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to keep talking and keep sharing. I'm going to go, speaking of sharing, I'm going to go ahead and well, speaking of experimental archaeology, one of the things that we've been doing is also we get a chance to spend some time on the Rhine. We'll be talking a little more about this experiment. It's a little hard to see, excuse me. I have a hard time getting this video to play a second time. There we go. And what we're doing is, it's a little hard to see downrange, but we have a block of ballistics gel covered with some recreated mail armor. And so we are trying to find out just how well mail protects against bows. And we'll talk about that a little more. Meanwhile, on the other side of the screen, you can see here's one of the engravings from Adam van Breen's work. This piece has that's all about. That's going to be the real thrust of my topic here. And we're going to move along because I want to talk about the armor for the Jamestown soldier. It's an important thing to recognize because we are focusing on the years between 1610 and 1614. And in the year of 1611, under Sir Thomas Dale, the Jamestown colonists adopted the universal practice of using armor. They describe how shot, meaning men armed with muskets and calivers, were to wear armor or a quilted cotton coat or quilted coats of canvas. Well, we made one here. My colleague Terry Bond is showing one that he made, and it was made in the mid-90s, I think, and we'll be examining this in part, looking at some things we learned about making quilted armor in a much earlier period from our first presenter. Was Ninja, right? Yep. So the most important thing to realize about the armor for a Jamestown soldier is while the armor was essential for everyone to use, the firearms are the universal offensive weapon against the Powhatan. The Powhatans were extremely capable archers and weren't about to involve themselves in the kind of warfare that Europeans would use. So quite different from fighting the Spanish. But tailoring your armor to your mission is an important job. In fact, if we look at the European use of armor at the time of 1607, you'll find that, well, we have three kinds of cavalry. I like to tell my visitors that sometimes the easiest way to describe how armies function with pikemen and musketeers and cavalry, a little bit like a big game of paper, rock, scissors, where if cavalry charge pikemen, it's not going to go well for the cavalry. And yet if pikemen are standing there in a defensive line being shot at by cavalrymen, that's not going to go very well. Well, that experience in Europe is fine and dandy, but that's not going to play out in the New World. But the important thing to remember is that a pikeman might be wearing between 20, 25 pounds of armor. He's an infantryman. He's got to maintain some mobility. He also doesn't have any way to get from point A to point B other than marching. And so there's a limit to how much armor an infantryman can wear and still be mobile enough to do his job. We can see that cavalrymen and musketeers and arquebusiers were never particularly fond of defensive armor. In fact, we rarely see them wearing anything more than a helmet. Meanwhile, there's the cavalry. And it's one nice thing about a horse. You can carry a lot more armor when you're riding on horseback. But let's look at the armor as it was used in the New World. I should point out that the Spanish were frequently studied because, well, if anyone knows how to fight against people in the New World, the Spanish have already shown the whole world they have a pretty good idea of what they're doing. But in the English experience, it's fascinating to hear such quotes as, well, Alexander Whitaker writes in 1612, while discussing the natural people of the land, he comments how important armor is to use against them. And this is my favorite quote: "Shirts of mail or quilted cotton coats are the best defense against them." Well, as an old medieval reenactor, I was delighted to discover that chainmail armors would be just as applicable at Jamestown as the plate armor that I had been making. And well, at first we manufactured the standard reenactor type of butted mail, but as time went on, we started learning more about how to make proper riveted mail. Now, the mail shirt you see hanging on the wall, I would love to tell you that we made that in-house, but we didn't. That is a commercial riveted shirt of mail that the museum bought for a very reasonable price. We weren't terribly happy with the tailoring of it. And so knowing how to make riveted mail, we were able to make effective use of our time to produce some more, well, a more historically correct pattern by putting a collar on it. But we also wanted to find out, this quote raises a question. There's many different meanings, one of which would mean that if someone is shooting an arrow at you, is Alexander Whitaker telling us that quilted armor or a shirt of mail has a better chance of stopping an incoming Powhatan arrow than a steel breastplate? It seems pretty improbable. But let's take a look at what might be happening when you're wearing the mail. And so we did some experimental archaeology. Some of our most fun things happen when we're calling them experimental archaeology. In this case, taking pieces of armor to the range and shooting them. We did shoot it with firearms, and unfortunately, we don't have as much video footage as I would have liked. The blasted COVID has been creating some problems for us, but I'm able to share this video shot by me. I apologize for the less than stellar camera work, but here you can see this was hit by about 8 arrows, 3 of which stuck into the armor. One, you can see the wooden point, it just hit, it wedged in, didn't really penetrate. I'm going to play that again. All of the stone-tipped arrows, when they hit the mail, bounced off. Some of the rings were broken, some of the rivets were popped, but we didn't get any decent penetration from that. What did penetrate was the Powhatan small game points. Englishmen describe how the Powhatans would use bone points for hunting squirrels and birds that were 2 to 3 inches long. As a result, we had 2 to 3 inch deep penetration where the bone points slipping through the holes in the mail. And while it would have inflicted a painful wound, it probably nothing too terribly life-threatening. However, it certainly doesn't, there's nothing there convincing me that it's superior in its ability to stop arrows to plate armor. So herein lies the question. Why is it the best defense against them? Well, this is where the climate comes in. If you ever visit Jamestown in the summer, you would be well advised to dress lightly because we get some fierce heat and some fierce humidity. And well, for someone born in the area, it's a little testing. For someone who's Northern European, it could really be a challenge. And so one of the things I've noticed of the 3 types of armor which you can wear, the plate armor on a hot summer day, I like to joke with visitors when I'm wearing it, they say, "Isn't that hot?" And I have to say, yes, it is. In fact, at the end of the day, I kind of feel that my torso kind of feels like a steamed dumpling, actually. And it can be kind of draining, can be rather tiresome. However, in hot weather, you'll more likely see me wearing a shirt of mail because there's just something about the way the mail shirt breathes. Also, we found that a shirt of mail is significantly lighter than the plate armor as well. And so I think what Alexander Whitaker is telling us is not that if you need to stop an arrow, you need to use mail or quilted armor, but this is the armor you're more likely to be wearing on a hot summer day when you need it. But speaking of plate armor, here you can see 2 images. One is the classic image of from the Jacob de Game Manual of Arms. And here we have a piece of armor which was excavated in Virginia. It's got a curious feature on it. You can see there's this metal tab. We've been referring it to as a flange. And although I've seen one European armor with a similar piece on it, on a piece of cavalry armor, you just don't see these on pikeman's armor in the 16th and 17th century. Now, if anyone has seen one or has any European evidence for this, I would love to know about it. I've looked through all my sources. I haven't found anything yet. But there are 3 pieces of armor that have been found in archaeological contexts that have this feature. They're all very similar, and I would be willing to bet that they were all applied after the armor was made, retrofitted by someone in Virginia. So the theory we have is that while a pikeman is very well equipped to withstand a barrage of arrows, he's not very well equipped with an offensive weapon against people who fight the way the Powhatans. Firearms were described as being a very effective weapon against the Powhatans. And so the armored musketeer is going to be a bit unusual. And herein lies the problem, and that is, how well does pikeman's armor work when you're trying to use a musket? When we were trying this firing blank ammunition, we found we could sort of make it work. But the question was, what about when you're firing live ammunition and you have to deal with substantial recoil? And so I'm going to talk for just a moment about how the flange was applied, because The first two pieces I've seen were extremely rusty, and because of the conservation required in the back, you couldn't see how the flange was attached. And in one of them, it's kind of hard to tell whether the flange is attached or whether it's just kind of fused into the rust. But the Jamestown Rediscovery archaeologist found a breastplate with the flange attached down a well. And that breastplate was in a remarkable state of preservation. And that you could clearly see the rivets and how it was held on. So if you don't mind for a moment, I'll get into do a little armor speaking here. The first thing that we had to do in order to copy the flange on the original armor was we had to cut away the rolled edge of the armor. Chaz, is there a way to make this? No, yes, there we are. I'm not sure if you can see the pointer, but here you can see that the rolled edge was cut away in to make room for the tab to slide in. And then we have 3 rivets that are placed. Now, the fascinating part is that when I first looked at some of the originals, you can see there's no evidence of the rivets on the other side. This is where the technique of the blind rivet came in. And I was a little surprised to see a blind rivet on what to me looked like a field expedient modification to the armor. Whoever did this job 400 years ago took his job seriously. And as a result, you really don't have these 3 rivet heads sticking up. In fact, on the originals, because of the amount of rust, they are completely invisible. If you look closely, you can see that what I've done is cut a countersink into the outside face of the rivet holes. And then when the rivets are peened down, they fill the hole completely. And then with a file, simply file off the surface. It worked really well. It did, however, interfere with the normal mechanism for joining the breastplate and the backplate together. So I had to sacrifice the armored straps at the shoulders. Well, I'm sure you'd like to see how it looks in use, so we'll move along. And I apologize, I tried to find a better looking model for this, but I was the only person on hand. So here you can see the armor I'm wearing it, and the flange is where it needs to be. And so one thing that I have noticed, if you look carefully at the old drill manual, especially that wonderful illustrated drill manual by Jacob DeGain, that it shows how the musket is to be placed. And if you're fortunate enough to be able to find a translation of the original Dutch, he describes how you are supposed to place the musket. In reading this, it always reminded me of, well, my childhood instructions from my father on how to shoot a shotgun, because as a young man, I was very into trap shooting. And so when I placed the musket into a very familiar position, I had to restrain myself from yelling pull from time to time. But here in the present your piece position, you've got the musket butt not on the shoulder, but tucked into the hollow of the shoulder. And that allows you to manage the recoil very well. You also notice that it's close enough to your head that you can simply let your head fall forward and let your cheek rest right on the stock of the musket. It's a good position, and it does allow for fairly accurate shooting. I won't go down the rabbit hole of talking about the accuracy of muskets and how the belief that they are so wildly inaccurate, other than to say that at 100 yards, we seem to be able to hit the target as long as we're using good marksmanship. And head position, bracing for recoil, all very important. So here I am in the shooting position without any armor. Let's see what happens when we add some pikeman's armor. Oh, excuse me. Here's a more clear picture showing the exact placement of the musket butt. Now we've got the pikeman's armor. Well, one of the things, it's awkward. It slides around. And one of the problems I had was, well, if I rest it on the breastplate, that puts it in the place that I want it to be, right in here. But unfortunately, the breastplate is designed to present a glancing surface. And as a result, the musket butt tends to slide off. Here you can see another picture of me trying to shoot, and you'll notice that I'm leaning really far over to the right. Until I'm looking at the picture, I didn't realize how far I was leaning, but I'm trying to get in such a position that I've got the musket braced on my shoulder, on the joint of the shoulder. And I'm trying to crane my head over far enough to the right that I can get my eye behind the front and rear sights. It's awkward. And the worst part is it takes quite a while to get into position. It's certainly, as I said, not easy, and it's not fast. And when you pull the trigger, it's not the optimum position to manage the recoil. It can be done, but it is uncomfortable. Of course, better to have it pushing against your shoulder than sliding off the breastplate and slamming into your shoulder, or worse, slipping upwards and striking you in the face. And so while you can shoot a musket while wearing an ordinary pikeman's armor, you probably won't enjoy it. So the question of how well does the flange work is, surprisingly, it works really, really well. You still have to crane your head just a little more over to the right, but nowhere near as much as you do when the butt of the musket is way out there on the point of your shoulder. And as to the recoil, well, the recoil is the sweet part of it, because it's almost like the breastplate's been designed to absorb impact or something. What happens when you pull the trigger? Instead of feeling a strong thrust into your chest and shoulder, but it spreads the pressure all across the breastplate. As I said, the position for your eye, it's not optimum, but it's pretty good. And managing the recoil is, quite frankly, a very strong point of it. This makes me wonder if, when the archaeologists recovered some human remains that showed a man who was shot with not only a musket ball, but about half a musket ball's worth of buckshot added to it, I can tell you from shooting ammunition like that, the recoil is stronger than usual. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe they want a little extra recoil management as well. But it wouldn't be fair if I didn't mention the drawbacks. Well, if you're wearing pikeman's armor and someone tells you, advance your pike, the flange gets in the way a little bit when you're performing the drill exactly as illustrated. When you get to the position of port your pike, that position where you are ready to lower your pike and engage the enemy, it's not a problem at all. But these are drill positions. Let's talk about combat. And I'm awfully glad to see that there's a few folks that are here who have some experience in European martial arts. And you can see that having a metal flange sticking out, pushing your pole arm away from your body, it's not a good thing, particularly when you go to thrust with the pike. This metal plate sticking out scrapes and grabs along the shaft of your pike handle. Quite frankly, it really, really interferes with the effective thrusting with a pike. Of course, well, then you just change your position. Hold the pike a little higher, hold the pike a little lower. The problem with that is, now when you try to maneuver your pike, if you were trying to thrust high with the pike and the flange underneath, it completely blocks your position. You can't bring the point up to thrust at someone's face. Likewise, if you had it below hand, it would be difficult to thrust downwards. It really gets in the way of using the pike. What I find fascinating is, of the 3 armors that have been recovered in Virginia, 2 of them, the flange, I'm going to see if I'm going to bring this one over. I brought a recreation of one. Does that show? Okay. So somebody simply took this and hammered it flat. Makes you wonder what the story behind that. Well, whatever the case, pikes and the Jamestown colonists really not a terribly important part of our story. They expected an attack by the Spanish. There were credible threats that the Spanish might attack, but there is no serious combat between English colonists and Spanish and Spaniards in the New World. So how important were the pikes? Not very. But I want to talk about one more aspect of this experiment, and that is that I realized that another organization, our next door neighbor, the Jamestown Rediscovery Project, when they were looking at the breastplate that they had pulled out of the well, began scratching their heads going, what is it? Why is it there? And they came to the same conclusion that we did, and that is, they're always on the right shoulder. This must be to allow a man to fire a musket while wearing armor. And so with a combination, a cooperative venture between the Jamestown Rediscovery and Jamestown Settlement Museum, we did a experimental archaeology, and Jamestown Rediscovery produced a YouTube video, which I'm not going to play here, but I strongly recommend you watch it. It does show a lot more of the details on this. And so I'm going to move along, but I strongly encourage you to view that. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Well, one thing that is a musketeer in the battlefield, a matchlock musket has a rate of fire. The very best you can do, or at least we've been able to do, is fire about 3 shots a minute. 2 shots a minute is much more practical, and it only comes with quite a bit of drill. And so a musketeer, especially if he's skirmishing, is going to be very vulnerable to anyone who's attacking him while he reloads. And the European solution to that is, rather than having small numbers of pikemen accompanying the loose shot, as they called them, or the forlorn hope, but Sir Roger Williams, for instance, writing in the late 16th century, gives us a wonderful description of how you should use the sword and shield wielding soldiers called targeteers. Although for those of you who've been studying the continental practices, I do believe the Spanish word rondalero is the term that they would use. It is worth noting that the Spanish used troops armed with the rondel or the rondelleros more than pikemen or halberdiers. But if people are showering with arrows, a friend with a shield is a very good thing. Well, the English in 1607 described that we manned our shallop with musketeers and targeteers sufficient. It looks like they're applying the same logic. And so what is interesting is when Captain John Smith is exploring the Chesapeake Bay, he mentions the use of native shields. Now, I'm an armorer, and I generally focus on munitions grade armor of late 16th and early 17th century, particularly English armor. However, when my colleagues discovered a tree on the property had been struck by lightning. It was an old poplar tree, which is what all the evidence points that the Powhatans made their shields out of poplar bark. I'm afraid I by our Paspahegh site, a small white triangle just to the left of the red stripe. That is the point of a Powhatan arrow. I know we didn't stick it in there. We had about a 65-pound bow. It was shot into it, and the ability for this poplar bark shield to stop Powhatan-style arrows is really remarkable. We don't know very much about them. There are no surviving examples. So we've been experimenting. What are they like? And Well, as you can see from the inside, we've got a little more detail. We had to kind of guess at how it's strapped. And well, the one that to the right-hand side here, that one's the one I'm working on because, as I said, I'm an armorer, and you can't present me with something that's unique to 17th century Virginia and not have me try to make one. So swing by Jamestown at some point, ask me how my shield's coming along, my Powhatan shield. So you might say, well, what are you going to do with it after you're done? Well, since Captain John Smith and his men on several occasions when they were encountering Powhatan resistance to their exploration, they say here the targets of the natives served us well. And so using these while using a firearm is interesting. We'll have to do a little more research and see how that's done. But I wanted to talk about the native shields because this is the only kind of armor that we can find that the Powhatans would use or make. There is another form of shield, which I really don't have time to go into, called a shield made by the Massawamaks. And they are fascinating. They're described as being made of small sticks and a strong silk cord bound together. This would be an interesting thing. If anyone out there has any experience with that kind of shield, please talk to us. There's no such thing as too many minds working on any one project. And so as I approach the end of our presentation, or my presentation here, I just wanted to share with you a fascinating thing, which a story from the 17th century, which has fascinated me. This is an incident which takes place related to us by Captain George Percy in the year of 1607. And I'll read this out since this font isn't the easiest one to read. One of our gentlemen having a target which he trusted in, thinking it would bear out a flight shot, he set it up against a tree, willing one of the savages to shoot, who took from his back an arrow of an ell long. Oh, by the way, folks, that's about a yard. Drew it strongly in his bow, shoots the target a foot through or better, which was strange, being that a pistol could not pierce it. We, seeing the force of his bow, afterwards set him up a steel target. He shot again and burst his arrow all to pieces. He presently pulled out another arrow, bit it in his teeth, and so went away in great anger. Well, this is the type of thing that fascinates me, and that is, we know what the steel targets, we know how they're made. We've made quite a few of them, and we also know they're extremely effective at stopping arrows. But the big question is, what kind of target would an Englishman be using, which is capable of stopping a pistol shot, but would allow an arrow to pass right through it? This, to me, is a fascinating thing, but it also is not completely unique because, after all, if anyone has studied the use of modern body armor, a police-style bulletproof vest is an excellent defense against a 9mm pistol, even a .44 Magnum. These are powerful weapons. So why is it that a modern hunting arrow can slide through that armor like it wasn't there at all? So I would love to know what kind of target is pistol proof, but not made of steel. And so the only other clue that we have is that in 1624, there was a census of the Jamestown colony in which they had all the weapons and armor which the colonists had. This in itself is an incredible document. But one of the things they mention is they say that more of the shields used by the colonists are described as having old leather targets. And so for those of you who have ever gotten your shoes made by a certain Al Sakuda, a gentleman who also lives in Williamsburg, a shoemaker, a cordwainer, he has an incredible knowledge of leather, and I've been talking to him. And so for those of you who have some experience with pistol-proof leather targets, perhaps, I would be very fascinated to learn more about that. And so, having thrown out yet another mystery for us to explore, I'm going to open this up to questions and discussions.
Let me take the shirt off.
Sure, go ahead and take the shirt off, Chaz.
First one I got here. I'm starting to apologize.
Well, Fred, Fred, thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. I mean, I've done a lot of study into the time period myself over the past couple of years for my own programs, but I learned so much from watching
that's
that.
Music to my ears, sir. I would love to talk to you more about the Popham colony. Those two are so they're so related to each other.
They are, and it's always fascinating. Like I said when we started, it always fascinates me how Jamestown persevered and was able to survive, and Popham basically just gave up and went home because they ran out of money. But so my helmet back here, I also have a capacitor that I was talked about earlier. This is based off of one they found at Popham, but they actually didn't find the whole helmet at Popham. All they found was the cheek pieces.
Sounds like they actually packed up their bags before they left.
They did. They found a lot of stuff, but a lot of it was in pieces. They did just sort of pack up their stuff and leave. And for a while, they called it the Lost Colony because nobody really knew where it was. And the site has never fully been excavated because a lot of it's under private land, so they can't actually get to it. But I have some ideas for how to deal with that.
I'm gonna take a couple. There's a couple of really good questions that I received here. Padded jacks and male shirts cover more of the body than a breastplate does. Absolutely, that is one of the things. In fact, if you get a chance to visit us, you'll notice that some of our crew are wearing a combination. We found a lot of historic paintings showing people wearing leather jerkins with male voiders attached to them. And so we've been experimenting with that. There's also for those who have read the old Laws, Divine, Moral, and Martial, there's a tantalizing reference to men wearing light armor and bases quilted to the small of the leg. And so all of my evidence points that the quilted base is a really archaic thing, early 16th century at this time period. So this is a fascinating thing, but it's only one reference. We have no reason to believe that anyone ever actually made them. But I'm going to take another question here. Given the colonists would have at least known of pike warfare, is it possible that using the firearms with the native shield could imply in fact, a bow? And so I think it should be interesting to see how that works.
Fred, could you repeat your answer to that? You froze up.
Okay.
For a second there.
Yeah. My answer to that one is that I think that's the right direction. The English describe how the Palatins are wearing the shields while shooting bows and arrows. So I think that a sling system is very, very likely. Let's see. Another question referring to the armor that from the tower was basically junk. Yes, the expression is wonderful. They, of course, remember that when they're telling the king, we really want this old stuff that you have, they are describing it to the king as arms wholly antique, much decayed and unfit for any modern service here. And one of the things that includes is 400 shirts and coats of mail. They also talk about coats of steel and coats of plate. And so that in itself is fascinating. Does it look like they're recycling them? Yeah, it does. Now, there is one theory that I rather disagree with, which is that they were chopping up their plate armor to make it into jacks. more jacks because my colleagues were working on. It is terribly labor intensive, and I don't see the Jamestown colonists spending that kind of resources. What I think they're doing is when you're missing a few plates, they're recycling some of the old junk. But yeah, the colonists were well supplied with a lot of old stuff, and most of the time they had more armor than they had people. And so, yes, there's a lot of evidence. I think you're definitely onto recycling. Okay, cross gained with layers of boards. That would definitely fit with the descriptions of. If you get a chance to look at some of the Tower of London gun shields, some of those have that cross grain. It would be fascinating. Love to talk more about that. So hopefully. Matt, thank you, Matt, that you're referring to. And it looks like someone was trying to make some pistol-proof targets. So I definitely want to see that. However, Matt, I should remind you that we also have that wonderful gentleman, Al Seguda, who has quite a collection of leather. You and I, next time you come down to visit, we have definitely got to spend some time shooting pistols, that very thick leather. We'll call it experimental archaeology. It sounds more professional.
I think I need to come down and get in on that too. I can probably.
Oh, please do.
It can be a business. It can be a business expense.
Absolutely, research. All right. Well, if that's all. Oh, we need to do it. Oh, well, you're very welcome. It was. Oh, yes. Let's have a party. That sounds good. Just remember, Jamestown has one other advantage for those of you who want to do a little research. There are also quite a few breweries in this area. So once we've exhausted ourselves and we've put away the powder, we definitely can do some relaxation and have a bit of social time as well. I can't imagine anything more fun than doing a little research on good quality beer and with my fellow armorers and armor enthusiasts.
I'm sold. I'm going to go pack up my matchlock now. I'll be down about probably 12 hours.
See you then.
Fred Scholpp, armor for the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation. I have one more question for you, the most important question of the day. What is your favorite armor?
I got to tell you, it's the piece of armor that came out of the well underneath the governor's chimney. They threw the breastplate down the well with a bunch of other old gear, and it looks like in 1617 they built a chimney over it. So we know that armor went down the well sometime after 1607, and we know that when they put the fireplace over the old well shaft, that was done in 1617. That's an archaeological find. It comes from a 10-year time period. There's no doubt that comes from the time of Jamestown.
Great. That's great to have it that narrow. So many don't ever get
it. It is. Yeah, and so we do have a very narrow focus in our military program, but we are, like I said, we're focusing on the events of the First Anglo-Powhatan War. And of course, with the whole interaction between at first two cultures, and then by 1619, we also have the third culture of African influence. So very much an important part of our story. So thank you so much for inviting me. It was really a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you again for coming. So we're just gonna take a quick break, folks, and then we'll be back with tips and tricks for making shields with Matt DiGirolamo. So we'll be right back.